the oldest Christian people. The oldest Christian people, chapter 1, the remnant of the Assyrians. After the fall of the Assyrian Empire, overthrown by the power of the allied armies of Persia and Media in 1610, this is probably after Ashurbanipal died. He was a really strong king, got them all together, and he kept these invaders like the Hittites, etc., etc., from invading his country, kept them on their borders, right? And when he died, they just flooded Assyria and overpowered them. Yeah. They had eras of being strong, weak, strong, weak, strong, weak, and then he came along and he totally changed everything and made them really, really strong. Here the Assyrians had previously maintained summer resorts in order to escape the burning sands of Nineveh. To safeguard their interest in this part of the land, they built strong kalas, or fortresses, in which they maintained ample army posts. Some of these fortifications and military barracks still remain. Other traces of Assyrian civilization in these highlands are found in the form of masonry, bricks, bridges, water pipes, spearheads, and many other relics of a native art. Even some of the roads constructed by the Assyrians are still in use in these regions. Evidently, the conquerors of the huge Assyrian Empire were satisfied with the overwhelming victory and the great spoils which they took after the capture of Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, and other wealthy cities in the lower portion of the empire. The victorious armies were rushing their forces on into Syria and Egypt, which at that time politically and economically were within the Assyrian Empire. Therefore, an attempt to conquer the barren regions of Kurdistan would have proved futile and indeed disastrous to a small invading force. In addition, the Babylonian and Persian armies were recruited from men of the plains who could not traverse these ragged mountains roads accessible only to a Highlander people. If such an expedition had been contemplated, therefore, by the Allied forces, the execution of the plan would probably have been assigned to the Scythians, northern tribesmen. These were mercenary troops, more interested in plundering rich cities than in conquering waste lands. Such were the geographical and strategic conditions which made Kurdistan an asylum and prevented the merciless conquerors from liberating the Assyrian race. In these lofty mountains the Assyrians remained secluded. There they lived on the memories of past glories and of shattered power, cut off from the rest of the race, which had fallen into the hands of the enemies, forgotten and lost forever. Even the might of Alexander the Great, who penetrated into the heart of the East, and the gallant Roman legions which ruled the East with their strong military organisation for so many centuries, made no attempt to conquer these tribes. Trajan, the Roman Emperor, in the 2nd century AD, marched at the head of the Roman armies through Armenia, touching the northern region of Kurdistan on his way to Persia. Here Roman legionaries fought against the Parthian army. Apparently the Roman generals had made a treaty with the Assyrians, similar to that which they made with Armenia, in order to secure a passage for their armies. It is likely that the Assyrian tribes were employed as mercenaries by the Romans. Thus the adopted land of the Assyrians heard the tread of foreign armies without becoming a field of conflict. On the other hand, the lowlands were a perpetual battlefield for centuries between Roman, Persian and Parthian emperors who were aspiring to world supremacy. Strains of Roman blood are still found among the southern Assyrians. Among them you can find the blonde hair and fair complexion, unknown among the typical Semitic dwellers of the mountainous regions. The Assyrians of Kurdistan bear a close resemblance to the Hebrews, with their long noses and round-shaped heads. Furthermore, most of the names are similar to those of early Hebrew. Hebrew customs and traditions still prevail. Jewish holidays are strictly observed, and eating pork is strictly prohibited. Not allowed, right? A kind of animal sacrifice is still practiced. The animal is a family gift to God and is killed at the door of the church. Some of the blood of the victim is smeared on the forehead of the person for whom the animal is sacrificed. The meat is eaten by the priest, the deacon and the poor. The hide is given to the church. The fat is used for candles. This author, probably Lamsa, remembers how his mother took him as a little boy to one of the ancient shrines. They sacrificed an ox, and his mother explained to him that she had promised this gift to God before he was born. All present-day so-called Assyrians do not seem to be descendants of the ancient race. There is little doubt that the Assyrian tribe, called the tribe of Jilu, is one of the lost tribes of Israel. This tribe inhabits the eastern parts of the district of Hakari. The word Jilu means captivity and is derived from the Aramaic word Galotha, meaning captivity. It is the richest and one of the strongest of all the Assyrian tribes. We actually found something, is that word Hakari? We found something, let's have to go have a look through here, a surprising Japanese interpretation of the lost years of Jesus Christ. Okay, and it says most Christians believe that Jesus was born and died in the Middle East. However, there is a small group of people in Japan who believe a completely different story. Some Japanese researchers think that Jesus' history is different from what is generally believed. This alternative version of Christ's story was forgotten until 1935, when Kiyomaru Takenouchi reportedly discovered an ancient document in Ibaraki Prefecture in Japan. The text of the manuscript is presented a shocking tale. It says that Jesus was buried in Harai village in the Aomori district in Japan. Moreover, the documents declare that he was buried at the site with his brother. The text, that would probably be James, the text looked very authentic and there was no reason to doubt that it could be an original. Nonetheless, the Japanese government decided to ban the document from public view. It became part of a collection of the museum in Tokyo, which was bombed during World War II. All of the museum's archives were destroyed. However, the Takeuchi family had made copies of the ancient text before they informed officials of the discovery. These copies became the gates to a forgotten legend in Japan. Here they are displayed. It's a copy of the document on display in the village of Shingo. The legendary tomb. One of the copies of the document is now located in a small museum in Shingo village, traditionally known as Sarai, near the famous tomb of Jesus. Analysis of the text proved that it was originally written in ancient Japanese. Nowadays, not many people have enough knowledge on this type of writing to read it themselves, but it is also almost impossible to fake such a manuscript. Okay, yeah, it is quite hard to fake a manuscript, especially an old manuscript, pre-written manuscript, but you can translate it and then change its content. A lot of people don't believe that you should go mess around with it and try to mess with it or, tamper with it, change it. And that's in the case of the said original ancient manuscripts of the Old Testament, the Lishana Artika of the Lishana Artika Sapreya of the original ancient, very old Tav Asher or Ashri, and also the Galilean Aramaic manuscripts that were hidden and preserved by the Apostolic Church of these, that they didn't have a reason to tamper with it when they were handed over by the disciple Thomas, supposedly 2,000 years later. They were found and testified to be intact. No one had ever messed with them or even had translated into a foreign language like Greek or Latin, because they knew the language, they could read it and they could speak it to the people through their church service, their mass, and those people knew that language and understood it, so there was no need for them to go and change it into any other foreign language, because most of the people there would have been Assyrians, Syrians, Mesopotamians, blah blah blah, etc. Right? Yeah. Okay. So goes on about this legendary tomb. Moreover, the first linguistic research proved that the traditional name Hirai doesn't belong to the Japanese language, but it seems to be surprisingly similar to the word Hebrei, meaning Hebrew. In the ancient Hebrew language, the word Hirai resembles the phrase a mountain. Okay, there's supposedly a picture of the tomb where Christ is supposedly buried with his brother. Okay, and here's some a description posted near the tomb, relaying the history that Christ was 21 years old and he went to Japan and he died there at 106 and all this sort of stuff, and it's all there. sign explained the grave of Christ in Shingo, or Mori, Japan. And here's another version of the story, which is known from the book Thea Uba Prophecy by Mako Tismake, who tried to find the real story of Jesus in Japan. According to the story, he described Jesus left home at age 14 and arrived to Japan when he was 50 years old. There he got married and had 3 daughters. He supposedly taught his rules on living, but it seems that during his travels through Asia, his teachings became more global than before. He reportedly lived in Hirai for around 45 years and died there when he was about 100 years old. The Japanese version of the story described his brother as 2 years younger than him. They were said to be buried at the same site. But archaeologists have looked for evidence such as bones, teeth or artifacts which could suggest the existence of a burial at this place. Unfortunately, nothing like this has been found so far. The burial is located on a mountain and is shaped by the soil. Nowadays, there are also Christian crosses and other features related to Christian symbolism. There's a video you can possibly watch on YouTube. Did Jesus become a rice farmer in Japan? Okay, here's some more here. Who was he in Japan? It seems unlikely that Jesus really escaped from the Middle East and so forth. Why would he have gone to Japan? Because the other one where by Brahmins and Buddhists apparently there's records of this Isa or ISA, Isa, being in Tibet, India, etc. You know, scrolls. Some English guy went through there because he heard these stories. He was presented these scrolls, secret scrolls, and had all the information there that Christ was there, and the Brahmins or whatever got all jealous of him and chased him out back onto the road, and then he went back to Israel, and the story carries on from there. There's some paintings. However, there must be something more hidden behind the story. It is possible that one of Jesus' students or his disciples, maybe even one of his apostles, travelled to Asia. Well, in the history of the Galilean Aramaic scriptures, manuscripts, apparently Thomas went to India, founded like 7 to 9 churches there before his martyrdom, and then maybe someone else, one of his brothers or friends in the faith, travelled to China, or they actually travelled through China to get to India apparently after the Church of Jerusalem was burnt. They left a stele that this Victor N. Alexander either heard about or came across, saw the Chinese up above, and then noticed that there was Aramaic underneath, so he translated that. So he said he believed that somebody that spoke Aramaic had come through that area, right, and left the stele. Someone had left the stele in commemoration of these particular people that had come through there. Yeah, so at this point it is necessary to remember that in ancient times the word brother could be used if two men were relatives, but also if they had strong bond, as for example close friends like the apostles, the disciples, or were the travellers just Christ followers who wanted to share knowledge of their leader. Perhaps they were the people who escaped from their homeland after the execution of Jesus because they didn't want to follow his fate. These questions may never be answered. Yeah. We went to the next part of that, where it said the truth behind the Christ myth, ancient origins of the often used legend. Yeah. All this information here. The ancient green man. During that Neolithic age, which was the era when, as some say, God was a woman, the goddess and his son, the green man, were venerated by people worldwide for annually bringing forth the earth's material abundance, all this sort of stuff. A universal legend about the Morosa began with the annual impregnation of the virgin earth goddess by the Son, the Father in heaven, and subsequent birth of his son, the green man, and so forth. Yes. The green man, sculpture of green man at festival, and there's more information here. Okay. Okay, so Roman 6th century Green Man mosaic in the Great Palace Mosaic Museum of Istanbul. What's that, Turkey? It's looks very good. This is unearthed in the main room of the Palace of Arad. It depicts two almost identical images of a man with a branch or sheaf-shaped head, and so forth. May represent the fertility god Tammuz, or a simple deity who died in the summer and was resurrected in spring in the Museum of Israel. And something about Egypt. It says, together Horus and Seth as the twins created and compromised the physical body of the pharaoh or the king, thus making the Egyptian monarchs modern representatives of the first and greatest king, Green Man Osiris. So trying to say he's green. He was green, according to this depiction. Egyptian deity Osiris as Green Man. Samuel and Dionysus. One version of Osiris' popular Egyptian myth had him annually murdered by his jealous and evil brother Set, each 4, and so forth. And there's more here, probably in relation to the Greeks, and so forth. Okay, we also found this. We've spent 5 secular non-biblical authors who verified Jesus' life and ministry. We explore some of the key players that provide evidence of Jesus' existence outside the records of the Bible. Okay, what is claimed has been claimed by Zeitgeist, that movie, hundreds of memes, and several scholars that Jesus is a mythological figure who never existed in history. They claim there is no account of him or his followers outside the Bible during the 1st century AD, and any that exist are falsified. That's their opinion, right? As Catholics, these websites probably Roman Catholics, they contest this claim with 3 different types of non-biblical evidence for historical Jesus. These are contemporary secular authors who verify Jesus' life and ministry, confirmation and archaeological discoveries, and the coherence of New Testament accounts with 1st century history. In this piece we will be looking at non-biblical accounts of Jesus from contemporary sources. There are 7 contemporary sources that are claiming to talk about Christians and or Jesus in the 1st century. However, due to questions of validity, dating and relevance with regards to Lucian and Suetonius' account, or Lucian, we will only study 5. These sources are Josephus, supposedly a Roman Jew adopted into a Roman family, the Flavians. Some say a turncoat, not to be trusted. A lot of his works, well, not so much him, but a lot of his works are not to be trusted or taken seriously because they reckon some latter Christian sect or something messed with it, right? Changed it to verify the Jesus story that he existed, all this sort of stuff, right? The Babylonian Talmud, that's a Jewish one, probably written when they were captive in Babylonia. It contains some other extra traditional habits. Pliny the Younger, who's like a Greek, Mabaseperion, and Tacitus, the Roman historian who lived supposedly 40 years after Christ, right? Of these, the Talmud, Tacitus and Josephus are the most explicit, reliable. That's their opinion again, because many have proven that Josephus, right, a lot of it's from a Roman perspective, as he was adopted, a Jew adopted by the Flavians, the Emperor Flavian, etc. So he wrote all to please his adopted father and family, right? Of these, the Talmud, Tacitus and Josephus are the most explicit, reliable and comprehensive. For these reasons they will focus on their writings, as the others just affirm bits and pieces already covered in these 3. So Tacitus, Publius Cornelius Tacitus, was a senator and a historian of the Roman Empire. He lived in the 1st century AD, and the surviving portions of his 2 major works, the Annals and Histories, which we've looked at extensively. We have the Reader's Digest version, part of a massive collection. Examine the reigns of the Roman emperors from AD 14 to AD 70. In Annals 1544, he explicitly talks about Jesus during his writings on Emperor Nero. He talks first about the Christian sect before then, mentioning Christus, the founder of the name. There's a name given to the people that followed him, right? The sect that came from that. The founder of the name was put to death by Pontius Pilate, procurator of Judea in the reign of Tiberius. Okay, so he's saying basically, because he was quite he was a great orator, etc. Okay, that's what he wanted to be apparently. He was really good at it, and then he looked at the records of his procurator, who recorded that, or had been recorded that this Christus was tried and executed by this Pontius Pilate. Okay. This confirms the biblical accounts of Jesus' death, and as it comes from an enemy of the church, it can be further trusted, as he has no incentive to make his account match biblical scripture. But again, don't forget, he's just saying that he looked at the records. He lived 40 years after the Christ, but he looked at the records and found that his procurator had tried and executed this Christus. Which is a Roman Greek loan word meaning slave. Okay. A Christian was a word they used for people who followed him, the slaves of Christos. Yeah. Okay, where are we? The reason some dismiss its claims, however, is that Tacitus never mentions Christians again in his work. They claim that this was addressed or added in later by Christians to give their claims more validity. The reason some dismiss its claims, however, is that Tacitus never mentions Christians again in his works. They claim that this was added in later by Christians to give their claims more validity. Okay, he's always a skeptic, right? The main problem with this objection is that Tacitus is writing about the lives of Roman emperors, and apart from Nero, the others he covers do not have sufficient interaction with Christians to bear mentioning. Nero's persecutions were extreme, even by Roman standards, and therefore it makes sense that Tacitus would mention it, but also to add some context as to who Christians were, as they were still in the early days and were still a relatively small community. And he also speaks of the Jews, their origins, supposedly, all that he's been hearing. Right, they came from Crete, they came from here, they were these people, they were that people. Yeah, he's giving a history of what he's heard or read in their era. The Babylonian Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud is a central text of Rabbinic Judaism. It is a collection of writings that cover the post-biblical history of the Jewish people. In Sanhedrin 43a, okay, so this Rabbinic Judaism, not too smart on this, right? Still got a lot of learning to do, as some suggest. Right, we'll get to it eventually. Is this like a different kind of Judaism? Like a modernized or different kind of Judaism? Where these specific rabbi or heads of this movement are the ones that are the spokesmen, right? And everyone goes to them and says, blah, 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 this rabbi said this rabbi is fantastic. You know, the sun rises from and sets in his, all that sort of stuff. Okay, the Sanhedrin, weren't they the, group, or like a Jewish council in his day? They got together and they said, well, the Mosaic law, or they did this, they said that, whatever, and checked it out. Okay, so it's coming from their text. Okay. It recounts how Jesus led many Jews astray, according to that Sanhedrin 43a. The Sanhedrin wanted to have him stoned, and on the eve of Passover, the Sanhedrin Pharisees, right? On the eve of Passover, Jesus was crucified. Apparently, Passover was like 8 days, and he was crucified the second or the third day or something like that. So this Jew in a religious chat room threw at us. Okay, and all this sort of stuff. The line, but not having found anything in his favour also suggests that a trial happened. This is all in line with what we are told in the Gospels. Because the Roman, I think it's Pontius Pilate, said, well, I don't find anything wrong with this man. He hasn't done anything criminal, or wrong in his eyes, but they were determined to have him crucified, right? Because he was a threat to the authority. He was exposing them. They had to do something about this man because he could make the people realise that they're being duped, hoodwinked. These Pharisees, etc., were like very money orientated, pompous, and all that sort of stuff. That's why they're called out. Oh, you vipers! They were called out by John the Baptist. You snakes, and that Christ or someone, or maybe John the Baptist. I'm pretty sure it's Christ said, you've closed up the doors to the gates, the doors, the gates to heaven. So these common people, the people can't get in there. Taking it all out of context, twisting it, all this sort of stuff. They like to sit in, the loveliest, cushiest seats, be all dressed in their finery, be the first, get all their food, all that sort of stuff. They had trumpets blowing when they walked down the street, that. Here we come, take note, here we are, all that sort of stuff. Okay, so maybe, so I'm thinking maybe this is a more up to date, the Pharisaic time ended, maybe, or maybe it just went underground sort of thing and it surfaced as this. Certain ones that were writing over the centuries then became, he's the man, right? And all that sort of stuff. I think it's the best way to put it. Yeah, let's refer to this guy or these particular rabbis as our source. Yeah. Hold them in reverence and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, that's just an idea we have. Yeah, I'm not going to say we're right, I'm not going to say we're wrong. It's just the conclusion, okay? You can contest it, as most would do anyway. Some reject it. Most interesting is the line, he is going to be stoned because he practiced sorcery. The reason it is interesting is because they have had to admit it was believed that Jesus had some supernatural power. There is a scripture somewhere in the New Testament that says, we saw what he did. How can someone have done that? We saw it with our own eyes, and they were like, that's just the verse we came across. We saw it with our own eyes. No one's done that sort of thing, right? No one can do that. So he might be, right? The difference, of course, is that they claim it came from some evil source instead of God. Okay, because he claimed that he was. He says, I am he, I am, etc., etc. So they says, you're claiming to be God, the Son of God. That's blasphemy and all this sort of stuff, right? Some reject the Talmud's account because during the Middle Ages many Jewish people claimed that this was not Jesus but another man that was being talked about. The problem with accepting this rejection is that it lacks context. The reason the Jewish people claimed that this was because numerous times between 1239 and 1775 all copies of Talmud were ordered to be destroyed by the church. Was that the Roman Catholic Church? The church did this literally because the passages on Jesus found within Sanhedrin 43a are insulting about Jesus. Okay, maybe they were saying, he should not be named, that bastard son of Mary, blasphemer, all that sort of stuff. Maybe that's what it was. The Roman Church didn't like it. The Jewish response was simply a way for them to retain the scripture, and notably it did not convince people because the text is so explicit. Okay, so maybe as we just mentioned. Josephus, he was a 1st century Romano-Jewish scholar, historian and hagiographer, whatever that is, who was born in Jerusalem. He lived in the 1st century AD, and his writings are an invaluable source of knowledge about this time period. Yeah, but just be careful, because they reckon they've been doctored, right? The main objection to his account is that most copies we have of it are clearly doctored to be more pro-Christian, to prove that Christ existed, right? This is evidenced by Josephus, a Jew claiming Jesus was the Christ, performed miracles and fulfilled explicitly all the prophets. had foretold. This obviously causes problems, even though we know it's been only slightly reworded. It was cleaned up in 1971, however, when Shlomo Pines discovered an Arabic Josephus passage, quote, in Agapius, the book of the title. Here is what the undoctored text says. At this time there was a wise man who was called Jesus, and his conduct was good, and he was known to be virtuous, and many people from among the Jews and other nations became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified, because he was forced to, right, by these temple Pharisees, etc., and to die. And those, well, eventually he buckled and ordered him to be crucified as they wanted him to be, right? And those who had become his disciples did not abandon his discipleship. They reported that he had appeared to them after his crucifixion. He rose again, and then he was alive. Accordingly, he was perhaps the Messiah concerning whom the prophets have recounted wonders. As we can see, even though it does not have Josephus explicitly stating Jesus was the Christ, like he does in doctored versions, everything he says verifies what we see in the New Testament. The account is reliable as coming from a Jewish source through non-Christian Arabic translations. There is no motive for these people to affirm Christian teaching. Yeah, they're Islam, right? Okay. It's Arabic. Yeah, possibly Islam. So yeah, there's no reason, there's no motive for these people to affirm Christian teaching. Okay. Josephus also records in Antiquities 1852 how John the Baptist was beheaded by Herod Antipas.